Hello and welcome to PASS Virtual Summit 2020. This is the session for getting started with PowerShell for the DBA. This is going to be super awesome. It's meant to help with the getting your way into PowerShell. The idea is that there's a lot of things out there for PowerShell, and there's a lot of content and people who've spoken. This is really to get you through some initial hurdles. You'll see that as we get started. My name is Ben Miller. And I've been doing PowerShell since it came out, even before it came out. I was at Microsoft then, and it was a blast. So let's get started. First, I just want to illustrate some things. I'm sure you've seen this slide many, many times before, but there are a lot of things that PASS has to offer. This is a great community. I've been with PASS. I've only missed one summit a few years ago. So it has been a great ride, and I've grown a lot because PASS has a lot to offer. The newest one is the PASS Pro member. I think that's a great opportunity for you to get involved. There's a few extra perks for the PASS Pro members, so look into that. The local groups, there's many times we forget that there's people in our locale that actually do things with SQL and other database data platform stuff. Seek those things out. If you log on to PASS and go to My PASS, there's plenty of groups potentially in your area, chapters or local groups that you can join. Don't pass up an opportunity to network. Some of those are very important to get to know people in your area. And also now that we're virtual, there's a lot more times we can interact with people we may not have met, but we know by name. PASS SQL Saturdays, they're continuing even though we are in a virtual environment. I've done SQL Saturdays in our area virtual, and it works out great. A few more attendees, so it's kind of fun. But they can attract a lot more speakers because we are virtual. So those are just the highlights. On the bottom, there's PASS Marathon, there's PASS Virtual Groups. I lead the PASS Virtual Group for PowerShell. We're going to be starting up here hopefully at the beginning of the year, and we're going to have monthly, if not more, PowerShell sessions that will be virtual and everybody can join. So please look at that. And then if you have spare cycles or you just want to get involved, being a volunteer is a great way to do that. Speaking, volunteering to help with the local group, lots of options for PASS. Please don't forget the session evaluations. If you don't want to evaluate mine, that's fine. I think that the session evaluations are valuable for the people who speak, mostly because if you hear nothing, you don't know if your session was amazing or if your session was not amazing. So we want to make sure that the speakers get an option to hear whether there's things that they missed, whether they are things that they could do better. So please don't give a session evaluation that just says this sucks. I hated it. Please give us actionable feedback that tells us how we can do better. How can we suck less if we suck? So please do that. Friday, November 20th at 5 p.m. If you submit your eval before then, that's next weekend, then you will be eligible to win some prizes. So don't skip out on that. This is me. The only thing you really have to look at is at the bottom right, my email address. I am open for email. I am DBA Duck everywhere. I learned to talk like Donald Duck when I was 7, and I've continued that throughout the time I've been alive. And it's a great party favor for little kids. They love to hear the different voices. So. But ben@benmiller.net is my email address. Please feel free to email me. I am pretty good on email and willing to help wherever I need to help. I'd rather you get in and get help and get started or get over the hurdle that is plaguing you than to give up and not do that. We'll talk about that in the presentation. The agenda, here's the agenda. It looks a little long, but trust me, the slides will go by fast. This session is mostly demo. We're going to do a lot of things in PowerShell and show you a lot of things, talk about these things. But first, we're just going to teach you how to get started. There's really not a whole lot to do, but there's a very important piece of getting started that will be important for you to keep going. So getting started is only part of it, but keeping going is the challenge. Environment, we are really going to focus a little bit more attention on the environment because everybody's environment is different. Some environments will not let you change things. Some environments are very easy and they let you have what you need. There's ways around those things in using modules and all the things that you have to offer. So we'll talk about that. Profile, we're going to spend a little bit of time on profile only to show you what you can do, and then the rest is up to you. I'm going to teach you how to fish, and you go cast your bait in the water, and you pull in your haul. So that's what we're going to do there. Concepts in PowerShell will probably be the main focus here, in that there are a lot of things that we are familiar with as DBAs or as database people, and we're going to just translate them and help you understand why PowerShell is pretty cool, and you still get the same sort of tools in PowerShell as you would in TSQL or in your world of management. And then basically we'll go into demo and do all the things we want to do to get you started, and then we'll summarize that and go forward. So getting started, the most important thing is to decide that you cannot do it without PowerShell. Now, there's a lot of tools out there, and we'll talk about some of those tools. But right now, we're used to Management Studio as a big tool that does a lot of things, and it evolves just like we do. And there's so many things that you can do with it. The reality is that getting started is about mindset. You can always do things a different way. You could probably go through your entire career and not use PowerShell, but I will tell you that if you don't use PowerShell, then you're just wasting some time. You're going to spend cycles that are really not valuable, and you'll get less done very difficultly, or that's not even a word. Very difficult it will be to get more done using the same methods, right? If you do the same thing you've always done, you'll get what you've always got. It will not get faster unless you do something different. So is it really that easy? Yes, it is. And I'll show you why and how. And do you get anything out of this? I will say that you will get a lot of reusability, and you'll get a lot of opportunity to really get a handle on things without clicking your way through this. So you cannot afford to ignore PowerShell. Maybe it's not your center of your world, but it should certainly become a big part of your world. So let's think about the environment. And most of this will be talked about in demo. So I'm just going to glaze over these things and just make sure I introduce them to you, and then you'll see them in demo. So environment is a lot about mindset. It's not necessarily about the physical environment, although we'll talk about that. The mindset is, whenever I think about going into manage SQL Server, I always reach for SSMS, right? Management Studio is the big deal. So I pull up SSMS, I do the things I do. I right click my way into a lot of things. I click new query. I might write some TSQL, get some data out of DMVs, and move on. Great opportunity to do a lot of things. The right clicking and properties, the right clicking and doing things with wizards in SSMS is a big deal to a DBA. I think that's a core skill that you have to master. Keystrokes, things that make it faster. The reality is that if that's your only tool, it's pretty heavy to download and install it. It's about 600 or 700 meg. You got to pull that down, then you have to install and wait for it to install. You might even have to reboot. PowerShell is on every OS that is Windows. It is just built in. And the modern OSs have the latest version and bug fixes in that. But the big deal here is that if you only want to use one tool for your job, it can be painful when you end up in a place where that tool is not there. And sometimes that's pretty painful. So the OS and PowerShell versions are really, you're going to look for 5.1 and above. So a lot of things we do can be done in the latest version 7.03, because the modules we'll use most often will run in that version because it's more advanced than 6. But the reality is, the OSs that come out now, Windows 2016 Server, Windows 2019 Server, Windows 10, they all have Windows PowerShell 5.1 built in to the operating system. And you get to have that for free. It's just there. We'll talk about how you get that to be correct. But the most important part is that if you don't have that, this is where the environment constraints come into play, where maybe your environment doesn't let you install a newer version of PowerShell. Maybe the IT people have to do that. I would lobby, and I will say that every place I've lobbied to get access to Windows PowerShell 5.1 have not been said no. Even in client environments where they might be banks or otherwise, it is part of the OS, and they've been okay with putting it on the server so I could have 5.1. Or you use it in a jump box. You have options to do a jump box, then you can put it on there, and it's not even on your server. But you can run these things because SSMS isn't on your server, or hopefully it's not. It's on a jump box or it's on your workstation. You can do the same thing and point to the SQL Server with PowerShell and have all the things you need. So what tools do I need? The reality is you only need the PowerShell window, but sometimes it's helpful to have a development environment, and that's what they use the ISE for. I don't have the ISE here I'm listed as a tool, but in a pinch, the ISE is with 5.1 installed with it. So you get it for free. It's an IDE. We'll show it to you. I'll show it to you in demo just so you can see what it is. But it's a quick and dirty way to get an IDE to let you write some code and then execute it. It comes with PowerShell 5.1, so you don't have to install it. If they've removed it, don't worry, because there's, like I said, on the server itself, you don't really need a whole lot, or you shouldn't need a whole lot. So the tools that we're going to see today are going to be Azure Data Studio and Visual Studio Code with the PowerShell extension. I will show you both. I'm not going to use Visual Studio Code because I want to be able to connect to a database, and Visual Studio Code has some extensions and stuff, but Azure Data Studio is built to connect to database stuff, have PowerShell extension. I can use PowerShell. I can edit other files. So I'm going to use that one just to hybrid it. I'll show you what you need to do in VS Code if you want to use it to get the PowerShell extension. It's really easy. And then the modules. So the modules we're going to install are going to be DBA tools, SQL Server, PoshRS job, import Excel, and we're going to start there. There's plenty of other modules that you can find out on PowerShell Gallery. I should have put that link in here, PowerShellGallery.com. That is your place to go search for tools that do SQL. Community written, some of them are written by Microsoft. The SQL Server module is written by Microsoft, so that's good. But DBA tools is a very community-driven thing, and there's over 500 commands in that module. So these are the tools. Set up your environment and get ready to have some fun. Now, this is where I'll tell you up front, this is where people have the most challenge, is getting things to run. I'm going to try to take you through those in the demo to show you how to get through the hurdles and what you should see. And when you see problems, you at least know where to go. You can always email me and get through the hurdle. Let's get you through it, because the reality is you have two choices. You can get started and continue, or you can get started and then quit. Those are your really options. You can get started in both scenarios, but the whether you continue is the key to success. If you quit because it's too hard, just know that you have an advocate here. My email address is open to all. You can even share it with other people if you need to, but I'd rather have you get through that hurdle, get things set up, and move on and get successful, because you will not regret it, I promise. All right, let's talk about part of your environment that is handy. Now, you don't have to have one of these, but it's a profile. Now, I come from a land way back when Novell was a big network operating system before Windows became a thing. And profiles were really important back then. They basically let you pre-set up your environment. So in Novell, it was a it was very DOS based. It was not a GUI at all. And basically you had to map drives, you had to map printers so that you could print, and you had to do all those things in a command format. So a profile let me set up my printers, set up my map drives, set up everything so that I could connect to what I need to do, save things where I need to do. And that's what it was. In PowerShell, it's really no different. PowerShell has a profile, and I'll show you all of those, where you can get them and what they are. I'll even give you a default profile you can have fun with. But basically, a profile sets my environment up. It sets my prompt up. It maybe creates a couple functions that don't exist that I use a lot. You'll see what I mean. But really, the idea of a profile is just giving you a quicker leg up whenever you launch a PowerShell window, or you launch something that uses PowerShell and it uses that profile. Boom, you have plenty of options to set up your environment. I'll show you some tips and tricks in the profile I'll share with you. So that's basically a profile. And then concepts in PowerShell. We're going to talk about all these concepts just so that you see what they are and what they do. You can see that we have a pipeline, and pipeline is probably the most important thing to understand from a perspective of knowing what things are possible, I guess. A lot of people will, you'll see out there online, a lot of people will do commands that will do a one-liner, right? I can do it in one line, and I can do all these things in one line, and it makes it fun. And the only way they can do that is through a profile, or I mean a pipeline. So the pipeline lets you pipe things together, and it's really weird to a DBA or a database guy because we don't get to do that in SQL. We don't get a pipeline the results into another thing. But I will show you why you want to use that, and I'll teach you how to be careful, because sometimes you can actually damage things and make things worse by doing pipelines, but pipelines where it's at. And then we're going to go over functions. Those are pretty easy. We understand stored procedures and functions and things in SQL, so it's pretty understood. The syntax is different as far as how you work it. So you have to translate that a little in your head. Once you get that mastered, you're good. Then we're going to talk about select. We actually have a select clause in PowerShell. We have a where clause in PowerShell with a lot of the same types of comparisons, but we'll show you how that works. And then a for each object, an iteration object. We know, a few of us know about MS for each DB. That allows you to iterate over the databases. It's not perfect, but it works. Iteration is not common, or is not the first thought we think, because it's been drilled into our head to do set-based things. But that's what the pipeline's for, is set-based things. You're going to pipe sets of things over the pipe so you can have some fun. So for each object lets us iterate, and I'll show you why we want to. And then we'll talk about aliases. We kind of have those in SQL. They're synonyms, but not a lot of people use them. They can get a little problematic in SQL because you can get really creative in SQL, and it'll let you do a lot of things that maybe you probably shouldn't. But we'll talk about aliases and why you use them and when you shouldn't. But there's lots of reasons to do those. And then remoting. Remoting is going to be your friend in that there's a lot of things that you can do without even being on that box. And this is where the environment comes in as far as the version of PowerShell on the servers. If you need to run something from a server and you're going to use the the remoting to get there, you do have to have like versions, or at least have remoting set up on the remote system. But we'll show you a little bit about that. We're not going to dive too deep into that because it's something of more of an advanced thing, but it is something to understand when you see things out on the web for a database person or a data guy. Concepts of these things are important to understand what they are. Whether you'll use them, that's up to you. How you use them, that's really up to you. And what you see out on the web, you're going to need to translate those with what you know. So that's all. And that's pretty much it for slides. We'll go into demo now, and we'll see what we have to offer here. All right, so we're going to close this and reopen it just so that we have a fresh look at what we're doing. So this is Azure Data Studio, and I will run that first. Azure Data Studio is an open source. It basically is meant to be run or allowed to be run on all platforms, as far as it's platform agnostic. You can run on a Mac, it can run on Windows. I'm going to go into it comes with the PowerShell integrated console. I'm going to go into the PowerShell console, which is basically raw PowerShell, which is what you'd see here in a blue window. So I'm going to go here. It might not let me. Maybe it will when I execute something. All right, so let me introduce you to the demo first, so you can download the demo script and know what is in it. I pretty much tried to give you commentary in the demo and behind comments. So these are comments. We're used to the /* and the / to be multi-line, or the --. In PowerShell, it is a pound for the --, and it is the angle bracket or alligator tag # for the open * /*. So that's how this works. This is a closing comment. This is an opening, but notice all the things are in green here. So you're pretty much good. Let me ditch this PowerShell profile and let me add a new one. There we go. All right, now we get the same thing that looks just like this guy. It opens up and just says Windows PowerShell. Same thing here, Windows PowerShell. So we get the same window, even inside Azure Data Studio. So the commentary's here, and then there will be commands we run to help you see what things we're going. So the first thing to know is that why PowerShell? And I alluded to it, but the reality is when you think about clicking, if I open up Management Studio, I'm going to start clicking my way through things. That's what I'm going to do. And the clicking my way through things is problematic in that I can never reuse a click. So I can't, something was brought up in the Wednesday all about PowerShell session, that the reality is you can't ever store a click in source control. So yes, you may have ways to do things by right-clicking and doing things like that, but you never get to store those and reuse them ever. So you can't reuse a click, and you certainly can't store it in source control. So the thing is if you have more than one SQL server. Now, those of you who have one SQL server to manage and one database to manage, if the checks continue to cache, just keep the gig because it's a good deal. I don't think there's anything wrong with getting paid to do very little. If that's what they want you to do, you'll get bored. But if you can handle that part, the checks still cache. That's good. But the reality for me is I want to get more done. I don't want to get less done. I don't want to wake up and have a 3-day project ahead of me to manage things that I just shouldn't have to wait 3 days to get through all my servers. But the biggest deal is it's really easy to get started. PowerShell's on every box. So if I right-click on the Start menu, I can see Windows PowerShell. Now, some of you might see Command. And if you do, you can open that up, Command, and then type Start space PowerShell, and it will open up the same type of window. So if I'm in an admin or an elevated console, I can get PowerShell to start. Or I can just click Start. This is a server. So I can click Start, and it's right there on your menu. You right-click on it, run as administrator. Or the only time, let me get this out of the way. The only time you have to run as administrator is when you're going to make changes to the system. So we'll show you some of the changes we're going to do as a system. And I'll show you that I'm not running this Azure Data Studio as an administrator. So I'm not in an elevated prompt here in my PowerShell session. It is straight off just like running PowerShell without any admin or anything. There are certain things you cannot do because it affects the system and it needs elevated permissions to do so. So even if you don't have elevated permissions on your jump box, you can get these things set up and run for your session or for your user, which is always allowed. You just can't affect the system, which is totally fine. But there's ways to get around that, not around it. There's ways to allow everything to run the way you want it to run. So don't let that be it is really easy to quit part. Don't let that be your hurdle that will just crush you. You will always have the option to do many, many things with modules, with code, with little scripts you find on the web. The biggest thing I'll tell you is that there's a lot of bad PowerShell out there that will not necessarily run the way it should or does bad things that are unintended. I just call them unintended consequences. The reality is you should always test anything you get from the web. Even the things you get from the PowerShell gallery, I'll still say you will want to test them. Make sure that they work the way you intend them to. They don't have any unintended consequences, and then run them in production. But test. If you're good at PowerShell, I make it a habit of opening up the code. Most of the stuff that's on PowerShell Gallery or in GitHub all has source, and I can look at it and make sure that it doesn't do anything weird, and then I can run it. So these 3 commands are your staples. Get help. I will say one thing about get help, and that is that when you start your journey into PowerShell, one of the first things you need to do, and here's the thing you have to understand: get-help relies on help being on the system. So the reality is that when you fire up a brand new system, help is a payload that Microsoft decided after version 2 they would not put as default. So the payload of help doesn't exist. So get help will get it. If on this system, I've already done get help. I will tell you, you will want to run you will want to run update help that's the very first thing you should do is you should run update help, which is just like this. And you update help and it will go out and get all the help. Now, the big caveat to this is that if you have a system that is not connected to the internet, so say you have a server or you have a jump box and you're very keen on security, that box doesn't have any connection to the internet, then you will want to make sure that you do a save help on a machine that does have it. And then you can make a share off of that help folder. And then you can update help with a dash source path. And you point to that share. And now the inside machines can actually update their help because you've pulled it down off the internet to a save location. And then you've updated help pointing to the internal location. So even the servers that don't have access to the internet can get it. So save help and update help, really big deal. Help gets updated every once in a while and for things that you want. So you may make it a regular cadence like you would install patches to actually go out and do an update help to keep that fresh. Okay. So get help relies on these two, whichever flavor or whichever combination you do, whether you do update help and you have access to the internet or whether you do save help. So that's good. But get help is a friend because all the PowerShell gallery modules require you to have help, and any developer that has functions out there for you should put help in there. It's a really important thing to do. We won't really go into how to do that because that's a little more advanced than this, but get help is your friend. Get command. What can I do? What commands do I actually have access to? And get command does two flavors. One, you can do a get command based on the system and say, what commands PowerShell do you know about? And I'll show you how that works. And then you can say get command, tell me what commands are in a module. So I could do get command with a command name. And these are by far the simplest ways. But if I say get command and I say star SQL star, that will get me all the commands on the system that PowerShell knows about in and out of modules, what commands they know about. And that can be a good help. If you want to do module, then it's get dash command module, and then you can even do name here and say, I want star SQL star. So you can actually name a module. Now, I will tell you that after version 3, Microsoft made a pact with the operating system that it will load modules dynamically. And this will come up here in a minute of why that matters. But get command with dash module does load this module to find out what commands are existing in this module. So be aware that if you didn't do an import module, it'll still load this one, and now it's in your system, and you can find it by using get dash module. If you use get dash module alone, it will tell you what modules are loaded. Okay, so if I did a get module here, we would see that there's not much loaded. I have Microsoft PowerShell Utility and PS Readline. Those are default when I launch PowerShell. That I get those. If I wanted to find out what modules are available, I can say list available, and I can say DBA tools. See if we have DBA tools on the system. And get module list available will show that I do have DBA tools, and you'll see I have 2 versions, 1.115, and I have 1.130. It will always load the latest version if I say import module, okay? So if I don't want 1.30 and I want 1.15 because of some change that was made in 1.30, I can actually say import module with a required version and say I want 1.15, and it will actually load 1.15, and you'll get that part. Okay, so that's a really important part about get command. Get command is helpful, very helpful if you want to find things. The other thing you need to know about get command is that you can also find things by verb. So this is a weird thing. Microsoft PowerShell has a principle that the name of your command should be, doesn't have to be, but should be, for discoverability, a verb, get, save, update. There's some that are not necessarily verbs like where, but we'll talk about those. We'll show you those. But there's plenty of verbs that aren't really verbs, but they didn't belong anywhere else. And then module is a noun. So verb dash noun is how you know the command. And I can say get command with verb get. Whoops, that's not what I meant to do. That's terrible. And I can say get and say, give me all the commands that have get in them. Or I can even say dash module DBA tools. And I can get those with get or set or update or backup and find out the backup commands really fast. So I don't have to hunt through all 500 of them when I say get command with module DBA tools, or have to suppose that it has SQL in it. It may not have SQL in it, so you may not see it if you do a star SQL star. So get modules fine, get commands fun. Get member is my absolute favorite. Inside the SQL Server world of PowerShell, there is SMO, and SMO scares a lot of people off. And I will tell you that you do not need to know SMO. It is helpful when you want a down and dirty way to get things. But the reality is you do not need to know SMO. It is loaded for you. It used to be that you had to load it on your system and install something. And that was back in the day where I did presentations to teach people how to get SMO on their system because it just wasn't on there. It used to be installed with Management Studio, which is no longer installed in the GAC or the Global Assembly Cache. It is not installed by default by SSMS. So that's a problem, or that can be a problem when we think about the things that we're doing. The reality is for you is that get member is its job is to tell you what members exist for the objects. So we're going to dovetail here into objects. Most people go, I don't know about object-oriented programming, but getting started, it's probably the hardest thing that people have to understand is that you don't have to know object-oriented programming because you're not going to program. You're not going to create objects per se. There will be times you do that. That's another topic. The reality is get member is there to tell you what is in that object. What properties are they? Do you have a string, an int, and stuff like that? The get member will tell you that. Hopefully at the end, we'll have some time and I'll show you some of these things to let you see what get member does. But SMO is an object-oriented library that gives you access to SQL Server objects in object form. We already understand objects. Let's just get this out of the way. The reality is that most DBAs already get objects. They just don't know them like that. They think programming, and TSQL is programming. An object of a table, create table. That's it. That's programming. You're creating schema. You're creating objects. A table in and of itself has properties. It has columns, and each column has a data type, a precision, it's all of that stuff, a data type. Those things are all objects. And this get member guy, he does some amazing things with telling you about your object. So we'll show you that here in a little bit. I don't want to get too much into that because I want to get into some of the other things to make sure you get a good start. And then we'll dovetail into some get member stuff that will help you get there. And by the way, you're welcome to ask questions during this session. The moderator will interrupt me if there's questions, but I don't want you to miss out. So if you have questions during it, we'll deal with that. We have 75 minutes total, so we're about a half an hour in, so we're good.
We do have a few questions, Ben, if you want me to start off.
Great. Go ahead.
Okay, so we are asking, is there a URL to the demo scripts, and will demo scripts be available?
So the demo scripts are going to be in the download in the how you entered the session. There's a download link. If they're not there, they're going to be at GitHub. GitHub.com DBA.doc. And you'll see in the presentations, I will have a folder later today that will have the session for past summit. It'll be a past summit folder basically, and have the getting started with PowerShell's DBA, and it'll just be a couple scripts. These ones for sure. And I actually, all the things I've done here, I'll put up there. So the one that is downloadable doesn't have these extra things I'm typing, but I'll upload it after the session. I'll upload it again so that it has the updated one, and I'll also put it on the GitHub. So GitHub, a DBA duck on GitHub, just go there and you're good to go.
Okay, great. And could you show the profile config you mentioned?
Yes, I will be showing it here just in a moment. In fact, in the environment in the profile section, I will show you all about the profile. Absolutely.
And is there a risk of receiving malware by downloading non-Microsoft PowerShell modules?
Typically, I would say that you're not at huge risk. PowerShell in and of itself is an interpreted language. The language is interpreted through PowerShell.exe. So you have to have either executable code in there, which if you download it, your virus checker will flag it because it's very obvious. PowerShell is supposed to be script. There are DLLs that you can do and do a compiled module like SQL Server is, but they would still be visible to your antivirus and your malware detection. So I would not be on a server. I would not be on a workstation or a jump box without having some form of protection or running it through something to make sure. But typically on the PowerShell gallery, no, you shouldn't have any risk because they're vetted before they hit the gallery. Microsoft, when you upload one and you publish a module to the gallery, it actually vets that it is not harmful. It won't say that the code won't do bad things, but it will detect viruses and malware that are embedded inside PowerShell code as executables. That's really the only way you can do malware at this point, is to do an executable that you don't detect. Microsoft detects those as you upload those. So if you're getting them from just from a website somewhere, that's why I said I would download them on a test system. Make sure you virus scan them. I mean, you got to do your due diligence because you can unleash something in production. So yes, there's a possibility. I have not yet in my career of using PowerShell since v10 and before, I have not ever downloaded something off the web that was PowerShell that delivered a malware payload. So I'm hoping that will continue, but I also use virus checking and make sure I do my due diligence. So yeah, great question.
And finally, could you paste the GitHub link that you mentioned? I think there's some issues reading the demo screen.
Yeah, I'm actually not in the session on the thing, so I can't post it in the chat. But
okay.
This will be visible to the screen, so you can just copy it in. It's just search for DBA Duck and GitHub. And I'm the only one that's DBA Duck out there. So you'll find it as the first link or so. So should be good.
Okay, great. Thank you, Ben.
If you have any questions or have any problems, please, feel free to email me at ben@benmiller.net, and I'm happy to help.
Okay, that's it for now, Ben. Thank you.
All right, great. All right. So the reality is that there's a lot of things in the PowerShell environment by default. I will show you what things come into play by default. If we do we won't even do host yet. We'll just do a directory of environment or a variables. We won't really talk a whole lot about this is a variable place. The one thing you'll need to know is that there are drives that you can take advantage of. We'll show you those in a second. We won't dive a lot into them, but we're going to at least show you where they are. They're kind of cool in that you can get access to things that is just not normal in a SQL environment. I don't know of any command that tells me all the variables that have been defined, because variables are scoped to the execution, right? So this one saves your variables. So in this case, we're going to look through the variables on the bottom, and we can see that there are variables for $ and question mark and caret. I don't use these a ton, but they're really simple and kind of cool. You can read about those on your own. But there's debug preferences. There's error action preferences. In this case, we're going to look at host, and it just says internal host. We'll show you what it brings back. There's also things like profile. We're going to see that in a second. That shows me the path to my profile. This will become a big deal later. The culture, ENUS, the PS edition is desktop. There's other editions as well. Here's our PS home where the PowerShell.exe was executed from. So that's kind of handy. So lots of things in the variable place that is nice to know. And you can affect these by setting the variables with a $ in front. So let's talk about that for just a second. We will talk about that when we get to functions, but I just wanted to spell this quickly. So variables in TSQL are at something, and then a data type, and equals a value. In PowerShell, it's a dynamic language. So you don't declare your variables. You just use them. As soon as it sees a variable used and set to a value, this variable poof exists. Okay, so that's the key piece here. There's no declare like there is in C# or TSQL. You don't declare something. You can type things something. So you can make it a type of string, like we do varchar 250 as a data type. In PowerShell, you get strings, ints, booleans, other object types. But you can declare, you can use a variable and cast it to be something, kind of like cast and convert we have in SQL. But the reality is variable equals Ben. Now there is a variable called var1. If I execute this statement, and then I do a dir of variable, you will see that, whoops, sorry, my bad. You will see that var1 now exists and it is equal to Ben. Now I can also see what type PowerShell granted this guy by using get type. It is a string. So the other thing to know about dynamic languages is that var1 was assigned the value of Ben, and PowerShell said that it found it to be a string. But now what? What if I did var1 equals 1? Now what happens? Well, it equals 1. Okay, so what type is it now? It changed to an int32. So PowerShell will deduct like it's a integer. Now, the good thing is that it doesn't assume the lowest. So 1 in SQL, if it was to guess what type it was, would be a tiny int. Well, what if you wanted to put a bigger than a tiny int in the variable? Well, you don't get to. It assumes that it's a 1 unless you cast it to be something else. So this is a little different. So I can assign it anything I want and find out what type it is with get type. Every variable has get type, but watch the get member part. Get member, and this is not normal use of get member. I'll show you the normal use in a second. var1 as the input object, and it tells me a lot of things about this guy. So we're just going to scroll up here and show you that the get type, or I mean the get member said, here's the definition of the member, and here's the member type. Every int has these methods: equals, get type, 2byte, 2char, 2. All of these things are part and parcel of the object of an int32, system.int32. So get member just tells me a lot about it. There's no extra properties. Look at that. There's no extra properties, just methods to execute against them. So I could change this to an int64 by doing a 2int64. I could change it to a 16-byte integer by 2int16, and it would become an int16. So get member really gets behind the scenes and shows you what you can and can't do, or what this object can or can't do. Now, the normal use you'll see out there is this: var1 pipe to get member. Now, this is the key here. This is the pipeline I talked about. We're not going to talk about that yet, but that's just introducing you to the principle of pipeline. Does the same thing. So notice it does the same thing here, in that it still gives me a get member. So I piped it to it. The only difference we made here is that we used input object. And that's important to know for more advanced things, but just wanted to introduce you to get member here. So host will tell me that I'm running in a console host. I'm running version 5.1 point, and the point is not relevant afterwards. As long as you're in 5.1, you're going to be able to access 5.1 functions and things that does what you want it to do. PS home we saw just basically tells me where the executable was executed from. And this is in C, Windows System 32, Windows PowerShell v10. There is a there's a x86 version of PowerShell as well. And the only thing that would change would be this System 32 would become syswow64. That's your Windows on Windows 64 running a 32-bit a 32-bit process. And so it would change to syswow64. Those are your two places PowerShell exists. Now, when you get into PowerShell 7 or 6, they start putting them in program files. Program files PowerShell, and it's a little different. But the reason they do that is because it is not a native Windows thing. A native Windows thing goes in the Windows folder. So you'll know if you're running on a native PowerShell, if you do a $PS home and it says Windows is your home folder, or the root the system root. So, but these variables are kind of handy. The last thing we'll talk about in the environment, I think, is the last thing. Yep. Before we get to profiles, is the idea of an execution policy. So this is another hurdle that people have that quit, basically quit before they get started, is the execution policy. By default, all modern operating systems come with a default execution policy of remote signed. Now, I had to eat my words because I found out that by default, yes, it is installed that way. But once you get Active Directory installed, once you join a domain, there's a principle called group policy. And that's what throws all of us off, because we just expect that Windows 2019, Windows 2016, and all them are always remote signed, except for IT departments who put GPOs, group policy objects, on these servers to ratchet it down to restricted. So by default, in all, here's your execution policies right here. Remote signed and restricted. Restricted basically says you can run any command that you want, but you cannot run a script. I don't care where it is. I don't care how you want to do it. It won't run a script. You can't dot source, nothing. So that is what people will do in the IT department, is to restrict the use of scripts and let you run commands. You'll find out that you can't run them as soon as you try to run a script or to dot source something, and it comes back and says, I'm sorry, your execution policy doesn't allow this. So now you know that it's not remote signed or all signed or something, or bypass something. You'll know that it's pretty restricted in your area. So the idea is that you want it to be remote signed. Some environments make it be all signed. Not everybody signs their code with a code signing certificate. So all signed would not let you run something that was not signed. So typically you do remote signed. So that lets you run anything local that is a script that is not signed or signed, and anything on a UNC or anything like that would not be able to be run unless it was all signed, unless it was signed. Do not get in the habit of saying, well, I want no restrictions, so I'm going to do unrestricted. This is a very bad thing. This is one of those ones that is, you get everything you want, no matter if it's good or bad, you get it. So unrestricted is probably a bad idea for most, because that will let you run executables inside PowerShell. This is your malware. This is where you get to run malware on your system. Don't get caught in the, I just want it to go away. If you need a session or something where you want to run without worrying about what execution policy is in place, and you don't have rights to change it with set execution policy, you can run your PowerShell window as bypass. And for that session and that executable time that you launch PowerShell, it will be in bypass mode, which means it will let you run scripts and things like that without being remote signed, all signed, or anything like that. So bypass is a friend, but don't, like I said, don't get caught in to use it. Here's where you matter. This is what matters to you, is the scope. Now, I will tell you that typically these two scopes here, current user and local machine, are your most common ones, mostly because you're either dealing with, I can't do local machine because I don't have administrator rights, or I don't have an elevated command window. So I can't affect local machine without that privilege. I'm only given options to run as a user. So then you run this execution policy for the current user, and it sticks. So if you set execution policy with -scope of current user, it'll stick. So the next time you run in, your user will have that scope, and it will run under that execution policy. So now you don't have to worry about it. The only time you have to worry about local machine is when you're running under a service account, or you're running a job in SQL, and you don't log in as that user and set it for that user. That scope would either need to be bypassed, or you'd need to be able to set the local machine policy to remote signed. And any admin can do it. And it's a one set deal. We'll set it and forget it. It's done. You can do that. And it's all good. So if an admin lets you do that, or an admin does it for you, you can set it and forget it. The local machine overrides anything, and it lets you run those things. Now, there's a dash force that comes in. So if all of you Jedis out there, you get the option to actually use the force in PowerShell, because force is a command parameter for lots of things. This basically says, don't prompt me for the change. If you were to set execution policy it would actually say, are you sure? And you'd have to say yes, and then you'd hit enter and it would do it. If you use the force, you pull out the Jedi lightsaber, it just doesn't prompt you and it just does it. So force is kind of a fun little deal. Okay, so let's talk about profile in the last little time we have. So profile is going to be your friend. Profile in and of itself just contains a path. And the path is your user path. So it's users, username, documents, Windows PowerShell, and by default, that folder does not exist. So if we go into our command window here and say documents, I have created Windows PowerShell, but there's no other thing in it. There's no scripts, there's no modules. By default, this folder doesn't exist in your documents folder. So you would want to create that because the file can't exist in a folder that doesn't exist. Now, PowerShell's pretty powerful in that respect. We're going to go through the profile thing in just a minute, but I wanted to show you where it is. It's always named this. Now, in this case, this is native PowerShell. In VS Code, it typically tends to add VS Code to this. So that means it's a different PowerShell profile. And I'm going to show you how to get around that because it will plague you. And that, again, a hurdle that you might not want and you might not know how to get past. And if we can get you past it, you may not quit, which is my hope. So editors, these are all good editors. The reality is that these are free. Azure Data Studio, VS Code, ISE, they're free. There's plenty of other free editors you can get out there. Really, what the criteria for me on an editor is it has to be performant. If it takes me forever to load it up and it takes me forever to get it updated, or when I'm running things and it takes forever to get things kicked off, it's not useful to me. It has to be useful. The ISE is there. Basically, it's right here. ISE, Windows PowerShell ISE. If I do that, it starts up this little ISE. It comes with PowerShell automatically, and it has this option of doing side-by-side code, or you can do full code, and then you can script, not script, script, not script. I mean, so you can have the option to do that. It has a command browser. So ISE is not terrible. It's just not being developed anymore. It's been deprecated in favor of Azure Data Studio and Visual Studio Code. But it's still there. In a pinch, it's a good editor. It has IntelliSense. It has your script window that runs. It's great. It now even does transcripting on the latest version. So it's really nice. So the ISE can't be ignored in a pinch, but it's not as robust as some of these Azure Data Studios and Visual Studio Code stuff. So just know that it's there, but these are probably preferred in the PowerShell world. But people still use ISE and love it, and it's just fine. Visual Studio is more of a paid thing, but it does now have the ability to do a PowerShell project and PowerShell files and edit them and have IntelliSense. And then there's always the option, if you really get really serious, you can do paid editors. I have a paid editor, mostly for other reasons. Now that Visual Studio Code and Azure Data Studio are here, I may opt out of that now. But there's other tools that come with my subscription. So those aren't part of PowerShell. They're for other things. So I maintain that subscription. But it's my choice. You don't have to edit. These are plenty good editors. The modules, the only thing I'll call out on modules is DBA Tools is free. SQL Server's free. PoshRS Job's free. And Import Excel's free. They're great modules. They're all available via the PowerShell gallery. DBA Tools has been written by lots of community members, including myself. You can contribute. They're out under, if you go to dbatools.io, you can actually go and get the module there or get pointed to it, and you get pointed to the docs. They have really good documentation, and you can contribute. There's all options to contribute as well. The SQL Server one is compiled. It's a Microsoft written. It does require 5.1 at least. So it has to be 5.1 point something. But it's because they rely on some functions that are only in 5.1, and they made a choice to only use 5.1 so that it had access to the right version of .NET. But in a pinch, you can get 5.1 somewhere on a jump box, and you can run that. PostRS Job has a little. I mean, these are all the other ones are not required to have 5.1. PostRS Job is basically to run parallelism. We know about that from SQL. Parallelism lets us do things in parallel. And PostRS Job lets us take these functions and run them simultaneously. So if I was trying to get things from 3 different servers, I wouldn't want to do them serially because they're different servers. I wouldn't bog down one server with all of it. I would do an RS job that would do a run space and parallelize one server 2, server 3, and then come back all at once or whenever they're finished, but they'd all come back and be consolidated back into the thing and be in one result set, which is kind of cool. Import Excel just gives me an idea or an ability to dump data into Excel. And there's a lot of formatting options too. It's really a cool module. So if you're trying to do something in PowerShell where you're getting data with a query and you want it in a spreadsheet, you don't even have to have Excel on the box. You just get to use Import Excel, and there's an export Excel that just dumps it into a spreadsheet, and you have it in a spreadsheet now without having to have it in Excel. You can copy that XLSX file out and then use it like a normal Excel file. It's really kind of cool. Here's where your modules folders would be. Program files, Windows PowerShell is the new one. It used to be underneath the modules folder in the PS home. There is still one there, but this is the de facto place where if you install -module, that will put in the program files, Windows PowerShell directory in the modules folder. So that's important to know. You do have a local one for you. So again, if you can't affect if you're not administrator, you can't put it in there because it's a protected folder. So you can install it here in your Windows PowerShell under your documents folder, and it has a modules folder that will have that. So you can put them in your store and use them whenever you log in. And then this is the folder for Windows PowerShell 7. So it just takes off Windows PowerShell because it's using .NET Core and it can be run on Linux. So PowerShell takes away the Windows part, and that's PowerShell 6 and 7 where it puts modules. All right, so if I did install module DBA tools and it was already on here, it would basically reach out and say, I'm sorry, but first of all, it would say you don't have administrator rights. So it does care if you put it here. If I did a -scope, I could do current user and execute it, and it would go, and I don't need administrative privileges at this point because I'm putting it in my folder. And so it would then execute that install. I don't know how long it'll take. We can kill it here in a second, but it should add a folder called modules here. And then it would put this, should put it here. Wow, that's really interesting. It didn't put it there. Okay, well, this is a fun little demo. I don't know where it put it. So we will have to find out where that goes. It's supposed to go in my folder. The other thing I'll tell you is maybe I'll have to blog about that so you guys get access to that. The import module SQL Server. If you are trying to run this on a SQL Server, this is another hurdle. People go, I can't install it. I can't install it. On SQL Server servers, there is a requirement for agent to have a SQL PS module. That was the original name. So SQL PS is SQL Server PowerShell. It's been deprecated. It only has like 95 commands, and SQL Server module has much more than that. But because there's commands that are the same, PowerShell tries to protect you because it has an auto load function that says if you use this command, it will auto load a module. So I advocate that if you know you're going to use them, import the right module. So this allow clobber allows you to function. So allow clobber just says, hey, if you find PowerShell, if you find another command that's in another module that's the same name, don't install. If I put this allow clobber, it will let it install. It just basically allows the clobber of that function. And now you have two functions that are the same name in two different modules. So you just be careful then to load the right module instead of letting it auto load. And then I can install module with multiple things separated by a comma. So that's very important. So let's talk about a profile. We have 15 minutes left. You're welcome to continue to do questions. We're just going to continue, and usually we do 15 minutes of Q&A, but if you want to have questions, you can put them in there now and we can address them, and we'll go forward. So the profile we know is part of this folder. Windows PowerShell, we don't see a profile in here yet, but I have the ability to just do a new item and do a path of profile, and with my item type of file. And I'm going to use the force. I'm a Jedi, and so I'm going to use the force. But I'm going to do a new item with a type of file, and I'm going to just use the variable that says profile. I want this file created, and I'm going to use force. So let's do execute. Comes back and says there's 0 bytes in the file, but it is there. If I go here, sure enough, there it is. But if I open it up in Notepad, you'll see that is blank. There's nothing in there. So that's fine. But now I get to use, it's not a PowerShell command. It is a system command that Windows knows about. So if I hit F8 here, I can edit it. Okay. So that's kind of cool. Let's go look at what's in a profile real fast. We'll talk about where they all are and how you can get around these problems with profile management. That's another thing that rips DBAs up is, well, how do I manage all these profiles? I mean, look how many profiles there are. There's lots of profiles. It's crazy. And you're right. And there's a way to help you fix that. So let's go into a profile and look at what the profile looks like. In my profile, I have several servers that are not set to use TLS 1.2 by default. Somehow it was a server that was set up before, and TLS 1.2 is now required by many websites like PowerShell Gallery. They just made that requirement a while ago. If you cannot talk TLS 1.2, you can't install a module. It will just throw up a bunch of red in your window. So I put this up the top to just say, hey, my security protocol for this PowerShell session is going to be TLS 1.2. Just use it. Be done. We're doing. So then I can do things from the PowerShell Gallery without worrying about errors coming back saying I can't talk because I'm in TLS 1.1 or 1.0 or some other protocol. So I just do that just to keep me safe. I don't have to worry about that. I get the date by using a format of year, month, year, month, day, and then hour, minutes, seconds. The hour capitalized gives me 24-hour seconds or 24-hour hours. And if I ever decide, I can do a .fff and do milliseconds if I really want to. But I don't believe I'm going to start a transcript. I always start a transcript. So I'll just dovetail into it really quick. I always start a transcript in my profile because the transcript is like the court reporter that sits at the front of the court. And everything that's said by whom is all transcribed into the record. And this is your court reporter. Everything that happens, whether you see it or not, think of an automation that runs at night and you didn't run it. It ran behind the scenes. How do you know what happened in that transcript? If they throw an error, did something that you shouldn't have done, you have no idea what that script did at the end. You just know whether it succeeded or failed. And that's even iffy. So starting a transcript puts a path, and I can use a $sign and split path in a parenthesis. And this is something more advanced, but I wanted to introduce you to it. So when you see it again, you won't be like, what is that? So split path is a way to split your path up into path and file. If I wanted the file, I would do -leaf as the parameter, and it would only give me the file name. You'll see that in a second. Then I do transcript is the name of the file, underscore, and then date inserts the date I did in this format. So that do the year, month, blah, 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 into .text. So now I get wherever my profile is, which is here, I would start getting transcripts. And I'll run this to show you. I register an engine event that says if I'm exiting, so say I type exit, it will register this event in PowerShell to say, if I'm exiting, please stop my transcript. The reason stop transcript is important is because it buffers the transcript. So it might buffer it in a memory buffer. And if you just close the window, you don't type exit, you don't stop the transcript, you don't do anything like that, you will get a buffer problem where that buffer will be gone and you'll just get what you got in the transcript, which is not helpful. So this is important to do this. It's my choice. You don't have to do it. You can take it out. I registered the exiting event. And then I also keep my history. So I also put that in my split path profile. And my history.clyxml basically lets me find out if the path exists, if this history file exists with test path, then I am going to load I'm going to import clyxml for the history file into a history object, and I'm going to pipe it into add history. So all the things I did in my previous session come back into my history here in this session. So that's kind of slick. If it doesn't exist, that means I haven't done it yet. It's new. So it won't try to add it. And then the last two things I do in my function or my profile is I create an exit me functions because it's exit is a verb and me is a noun. So it works. I stop the transcript and I get my history where the execution status is completed, and I export that out to my history file. So that's exiting, and then I exit the window. So that's a function that I can put in my profile that lets me manage my my transcript and my history. Then there's a fun little one that I always want to know what assemblies are loaded. So when I import a module, like I said before, when we use SMO, it's loaded for us by default if we import the module SQL Server, if we import the module DBA tools. They all come and load SMO into your session for you. If I want to know what version or whatever, I have my get my OS assemblies, and it just basically runs a command to go get the full name and sort it by full name and give it to me in my window. So I don't have to type in this whenever I want it. I just type in get my OS assemblies. I'm good. Okay. And then the last thing is a really funky thing. It looks weird, but it was about saving keystrokes. So I saw this guy out on the web. I can't remember who it is. I should actually attribute this to him. He did this thing where we saved every keystroke we could. So if I type exit and enter, that's 5 characters. If I do an alias or something else that gets me shorter things, this is as short as you could get it. So this is the shortcut. char4 is, and it had to be done in an expression because there's no way to do a char4 in anything except doing this. But char4 is basically a control D. So if I hit control D, that's 2 keystrokes, or maybe 1 if you count the combo keystroke as 1, and then enter is the second keystroke. So that's 2 instead of 5. So I've saved 3 keystrokes every time I want to exit. But basically all it does is run the exit me function up here, and then it executes this and goes out. So that's kind of nice. There is no way yet that I found, and that anybody's found on the web, to trap the X button at the top of the PowerShell window. So you don't get that luxury of Xing out of the window and having it do what you want it to do. It just doesn't happen. So this is my part of my contribution to helping. And it's not my contribution. Somebody else did it, but I will have to attribute that to somebody else. And here's my prompt. So the prompt's more fun. I've adapted this from some. I'll show you how it works in another window. We're going to go here and actually we're just going to dot source it. So we're going to go to D and demos. This is another thing you'll learn. Oh, this is the VM. You're funny. Yeah, there we go. Say demos, and then I have my profile right here in my getting started. Getting started. And I'll dot source. So dot sourcing is something I talk about as well, but dot sourcing really is about putting a dot in front of it. So I'll show you how to do that here. So I dot space, and then if I'm doing a relative path, I do a dot backslash and do tab, and it will there's my getting started, but there's my profile. Or I can do a full path. So I can actually do C demos and do a full path. I would do that because what I did here is I actually created a folder called Posh Profile. And there's my profile right there. So if I right clicked on this and did copy as path, I could actually go back here and say dot source and then paste this in. And this is another hurdle people get stuck on really quick. In the PowerShell window, when you're in this blue guy, or sometimes it's black, if you highlight something like this and you want to copy it, the newer ones let you do Control C. But if it doesn't work and just gives you a caret C, you can right click anywhere in the window after it's highlighted and it will copy. And then when I want to paste, I just go in the window and I right click again and it will paste it. So that's one thing that people get really hung up on. So I'm going to dot source my profile to show you what it does. It basically started my transcript. As you can see, it put the date in there and the time and the .txt. So there's my transcript, and you'll see it right here. If I go into Documents, Windows, PowerShell, you'll see it. Here's my transcript. All it has in it is this stuff. It just tells you when and how, and then that you've started the transcript, and then now your commands are here. Okay, so that's good. The reality is what it does is it gives me a date and time here. So it's in red. Now in the transcript, it's just going to be black because it's just text. Then I do a colon, and then here's my, in yellow, here's the time it took to run my last command. So if I run a command and it's going to take a while and I walk away, I don't have to rely on anything. I have my date and time it started, or at least the date and time that this window was there. And then it gives me the date and time when it stopped, but it also gives me the time it took to run the last command. So that's kind of handy. And then a colon, and then C demos, it tells me my current path where I'm at right now. I'm in that folder. But then at the beginning of the line, so that I have the full, if I want to do a one-liner, I have the full gamut of my path here before it wraps. And before that, I have the number of the last history that is in my history. So if I typed in get history, you would see I have 11, and that was 12. And I don't see 12 until I type in get history, and then I'd see 12, and then I'd see 14. So I'd never see the one I just did because it wasn't in history yet. It's kind of like an uncommitted transaction, right? It's not there yet. But I have this nice one-line thing that tells me all about my environment and what my command ran in, and then I get my command prompt. So that's kind of fun. And my functions, I can say get dash my OS and tab. Here's my assemblies that are loaded by default. Management, PowerShell, system. If I were to import module, SQL Server, you would see get my OS assemblies, and it does up arrow, fine. You'll see all the SQL Server ones. Management, SDK, reg serve, service broker, SMO, it's for 15100. So I get lots of things in that realm because I have this profile. So it's kind of fun. The profile is included in the download, so you can modify the daylights out of it. You can use what I have. You can rip it out and not use it. It's your choice. So let's go down. And then, like I said, this is all here for you, so you can use it. Let's talk about functions really quick. We saw some of them, but just the anatomy of a function, since we only have a few minutes left. The function is verb dash noun, and I would just get used to that. If you can't decide, you can leave the dash out. You can name them whatever you want, but it's up to you. You can even name it 2 characters if you want to. But there's a param block that tells you the parameters, and you can type them. I could just leave this out if I wanted to, and it would accept anything. If I do Boolean, it will only accept true or false. So that's kind of why you type things, is so that if you type it as Boolean, it can only accept, and it will throw an error. If it doesn't give you, if you don't put in a Boolean, it will throw an error. String name, and then my return string. Here's the principle I want you to understand, is I can use these parameters in here to determine whether I put things in here. And then you have 3 ways to return it from the function. In a stored procedure, you return a result set by doing select. You return a return value by saying return. There's really no other way. In PowerShell, you have the option of saying return with the thing you're going to return. So I'm going to return this return string thing. Notice I didn't declare it. I just used it, and then it became declared. I can just send it back, return string, send it back as a value, and it becomes part of the output. Or I can say write output. My choice, but this is how you return things. And if I executed this, all it does is put the definition in memory. Oh, it's being crazy. It puts it in memory so I can use it, but it doesn't execute it. It just puts it in memory so I can use it now. And if I say this line, Ben Miller is awesome, is true, the name I replaced Ben Miller with is DBA Duck, it would come back in my thing and say, the new Ben Miller is DBA Duck and he is awesome. Or I say, yeah, he's not so awesome, and his name's Bob O'Bob, and it says the new Ben Miller is Bob O'Bob and is okay. And I did is okay twice. Is okay. Should have said he is okay. Yeah. So anyway, but if I want, say I made that change, now I can go back and execute this again, and it replaces the function of Ben Miller, and it's all good. Okay. Yeah. So it's dollar sign profile, not pound sign profile. So when you think about all the things that you're doing in variables, they're always prefaced with a dollar sign in PowerShell. The pound sign is really a comment function. So the pound sign here is just commenting out this line. But every variable in PowerShell begins with a $sign and must be a character first, or like an underscore, something like that. It has to be that. It can't be an invalid character. So that might help you with your variables and stuff like that. The last thing we'll talk about, I guess we're up against time, but there's things in here you can do for each and get service and stuff like that. I want you to play with this. This is important to play with. It's really something you want to practice, but this is all documented in here for you all the way through. And the last thing I want you to know about is when you use functions, they have parameters, and it's tempting to shortcut the parameters with a character significance, but that's out there on, I believe I've blogged about it as well. But we'll stop here and we'll go back to our slides and finish. So we've looked at lots and lots of things with PowerShell. The reality is that it's not just for IT. It does lots of IT functions, but it's really about getting more value out of your things. And it is a must add for your tool set. You need to be able to use this thing. You came into this session with not very much knowledge or some knowledge, and you can start your journey anytime you want. Thank you very much. My email address is at the bottom. You can get a hold of me on Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook at DBA Duck. And thank you for the session, and hopefully you have a great day and week and year past this COVID time. Thank you very much.
We do have one more question here, Ben. Could you provide a sample default execution policy statement for beginners to add to new scripts and avoid policy problems, please?
Yep, we will do that right here. So the execution policy is set-execution policy. And the policy is set execution. I don't know why my ID is having a cow now. Execution policy is remote signed. Scope is current user. If you cannot change it yourself, then you would put this in your place. And that will set it for you, and you don't need administrator privileges. So that will fix your policy. So at least you can run it as you and not have to worry about your scope of local machine. That'll do it.
And there's a question asking for your website.
Oh, my website is dbaduck.com. Everything's DBA Duck. So dbaduck.com, LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, DBA Duck. You're good. You'll find me out there. And if you search Ben Miller SQL, I'm the first link. So you're good. Always be able to find me.
Okay, great. I think that's it.
Okay. Thank you very much, everybody, and have a great summit on the last day.